Hello readers, welcome back to part 2 of my July wrap-up. I will link the first one down below. And let's just move on and get this started. I'm going to talk about all of the audiobooks that I read this month and then finish up with the non-reading challenge books that I did. So as you'll know from my last video, I read Crank and Glass by Ellen Hopkins, and they take place over this meth addiction. You can watch the other video. I also read Impulse and Perfect. Impulse takes place among 3 characters who are in a treatment center pretty similar to the one that I work at, and for the most part they're all there for like suicidal ideation and some drug abuse. They're trying to go through therapy, which they struggle with. A lot of people struggle with it. A lot of it is a family drama sort of a thing. They have issues with parents of some kind or another, issues with siblings. There's Connor, Tony, don't remember the girl's name. Connor's family ends up moving on into the second book, which is Perfect, where you find out that in his life, his parents are very much, you have to be a perfect student, you have to be a perfect sports person, you have to be a perfect model, whatever, and it's a very high pressure family, and that's essentially how he ended up where he was at in the treatment center. The second book starts around the same time as the first book and ends a little bit after the first book, so same time frame, same kind of general events are going on, but 2 different places, 2 different perspectives, and it's the family, again, of Connor, who is in the treatment center, and you're focusing more on, it's Connor's sister and some of the kids she goes to school with, and Perfect centers on being perfect and the pressure to be perfect, whether that's physically perfect, scholastically perfect. Yeah. Very intense. I liked these books a little better than Crank and Glass. I think they were just more, I related to them a little bit more, not only because of my own perfectionism and my anxiety over it, but working in a treatment center, I thought that Impulse was just a really awesome representation of what kids might be feeling when they're going through that kind of mental health center experience. And the last Ellen Hopkins book that I read was by far my favorite, and that was Identical. Identical is a book about identical twins. One of them has become the favorite of her father. He started molesting her and engaging in a sexual relationship with her, and the second sister, the other identical twin, is jealous of that. Not so much of the sexual relationship as she is the connection and intimacy, or what she sees as the connection and intimacy. She ends up seeking intimacy elsewhere through a lot of sexual relationships, while her sister, who has a relationship with the father, is really struggling with that, and she doesn't want to have this happening to her. She doesn't want to take part in this relationship, but her father is her father. He has a lot of control over her. She doesn't know what to do about any of it. She doesn't know who to confide in. And it just really goes into the relationship dynamics between the 2 sisters. I thought this book was awesome. It is my absolute favorite. I have a lot of varied interests in the human sexuality field, so this one just really... I like the dark topics. What can I say? I find them interesting. And what else? The next audiobook that I read, I actually read probably a little more than half of it in June, and I finished it at the beginning of this month, and that was Joe Hill's Nosferatu. I have a lot of unpopular opinions on this book. For one thing, it was way too long. He could have gotten his point across, he could have told a great story and still cut out like half of it. By the time I had a couple hours left in my audiobook, I sped it up to, I think, the 2 times speed. And I'm just like, I want this book to be over already. I'm tired of listening to it. And I think that the book engaged in a lot of false advertising. It's called Nosferatu. Nosferatu is kind of a reference to Dracula and to vampires. And there was kind of a vampirical idea to this book, where he's kind of like a soul-sucking guy, or I don't know, the main villain in this, and his car, which is also a villain. The car is something else I need to talk about. He kidnaps children, he takes them to Christmas land, and they kind of become these dark beings. There is a vampire-ishness somewhere in there, but it wasn't what I expected it to be. The car is going to be me getting into an opinion on Joe Hill that I have never heard anyone talk about, and I think we as readers need to have a serious conversation on Joe Hill. Stephen King is Joe Hill's dad. Stephen King has a thing with haunted cars. Joe Hill writes a book about a haunted car. At one point they come up with this map of like all these kind of magical doorways that people are coming across, and one of those places is Pennywise's Circus. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Because that's from It, also written by Stephen King. And Joe Hill's style is very much a Stephen King style. That I don't really fault him for. Stephen King is his dad. He grew up with him as his dad, as a writer that he could talk to and interact with, so I get that. My husband's a pretty big Stephen King fan. We were talking about this a lot, about a lot of the similarities. I'm not going to say that Joe Hill is plagiarizing, but I do think that he needs to become his own writer and stop copying his dad. Again, that's going to be super unpopular, but I think we need to have a serious discussion on this. Is Joe Hill really his own writer right now, or is he just a Stephen King reproduction? Please leave your comments down below. This is an important thing to talk about. I'm not going to say he's a problematic author right now, but if he continues to do stuff like this, I probably won't read Joe Hill, because he's not being his own writer, he's being a bit of a copycat. Again, I'm not going to say it's plagiarizing, but he's kind of building on his dad's world, and I don't think that that's something he should do. That's all I'm going to say about this right now. I think I should have a video with my husband, who's much more knowledgeable on Stephen King books, and much more of a literary-minded person, I think, than I am. I think he and I could have a really awesome conversation on this for my channel. Anyways, moving on, lighter topics. Made by Stephanie Land. This was an amazing nonfiction book. It was a memoir, and this was pretty cool because Stephanie Land, I want to say she was from Alaska, and she moves to Washington, and she really wants to live in Missoula, Montana. Missoula, Montana is like a 4 or 5 hour drive from where I am, so it's really cool that, hey, state recognition, because I've actually come across people who don't realize that Montana is one of the 50 states. Yeah, I don't live in Canada. There are 50 states in America. You should probably know that. Anyways, that's a story for another day. Yes, Made. Made is Stephanie and her daughter trying very hard to live life, having bad luck. The world is against them because they are low income, they are bottom of the barrel, like, they're kind of homeless, I think, at one point. They're living on food stamps, they're living on Medicaid. The problem with the food stamps, and I have a very strong opinion on this, again, not really for this channel and this video, but she will go shopping and she will use her food stamps, and people behind her will say, "You're welcome." If you have ever done that, you're rude. Unfollow me, please. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I have a lot of strong opinions for this video. So, anyways, yes, she's very low income. She is trying to work. She has work as a maid, and it's kind of her experiences with the people that she worked with and the houses that she worked with, and reflecting on her own life and the life that she wants for herself and her daughter, how hard it is to be low income and still have to prove that you're low income. This is ridiculous. Like, you have to be first in line at the Medicaid office before it even opens to even be seen in the first half of the day. She has to work. She has no money. She's barely holding on to her house, but she has to take time out of her work day, sometimes several days, just to be seen at the Medicaid office in order to prove that she is a low-income person. It is my job to work with low-income people. I'm telling you, this sucks, life is unfair, and this memoir is a testament to that. It was very powerful. If you are interested whatsoever in low-income life, read this book. It's amazing. The writing is really great. It was her dream to be a writer. She somehow made it happen. Awesome for her. I would love to read more of her books, should she decide to write more books someday. And my last audiobook I have is The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I saw the movie for this several years ago. I thought it was really, really good. You kind of see the ending coming, but that doesn't take away from the ending, which is a sign of an excellent writer. My first experience with John Boyne was The Heart's Invisible Furies. I will link my review down the book. I will link my review down below. I loved that book. It was phenomenal. Boy in Striped Pajamas was also really good. Heart's Invisible Furies was like a 20-hour audiobook, and I think it was 20 hours. It's been a while. And The Boy in the Striped Pajamas I finished in maybe 4. So I'm thinking this is a pretty small book. I don't actually know what it looks like physically, how thick it is. But I'm going to say it's a pretty short book. A boy and his family move from Berlin over to Auschwitz because the boy's father is an officer, a German officer, a Nazi, and he moves from having a lot of friends to having no friends. There's no one in their area. He has no one to play with. His sister has no one to play with. It also goes a lot into the antagonism between his sister and him. He doesn't really see his dad a lot, but he knows his dad is supposed to be an important person. And he gets bored. He wants to be an explorer someday, so he does a lot of exploring. He misses having the bigger house where he could explore. And one day, while exploring around the Auschwitz area, he comes across the camp. He does not understand what it is. He's 9 years old in this book. John Boyne did take some liberties with Auschwitz and with the mind of this 9-year-old to make this story happen, but I think that's fine. Our 9-year-old main character is pretty much, he's very naive. He just cannot comprehend what's going on. He doesn't understand what Auschwitz really is. He doesn't understand why the Jews aren't people. And he comes across a Jewish boy who is his age, actually his same birthday, which is interesting. And they talk to each other through the fence. And I'm not going to tell you the rest because that would be a huge spoiler. But I love World War II stories, whether they're nonfiction or fiction. I have a whole shelf of like war-related stuff. About half of it's World War II now. The rest of it's my husband's. Something about the Holocaust was so interesting. It was horrible, but I do love to read about it. It's like I always want to know more. Like, why did this happen? Why are we so awful? What were these people's experiences like? Highly recommend The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I have 3 more books to talk about that are not audiobooks. So I started this month off with My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. This is my 3rd Daphne du Maurier book. I did actually like Rebecca better. When I started this book, I wasn't really sure how much I was going to like it. I ended up really loving it, as I have all of Daphne du Maurier's books. This one's just... Daphne du Maurier, I've noticed in the 3 books of hers that I've read, she is a very slow burn author. She takes her time with things. If you don't like books taking their time, don't read her. She is a gothic author, and My Cousin Rachel is... You have Philip, whose cousin is Ambrose. Ambrose ended up raising him from babyhood, and Ambrose kind of raises him with his own ideas of marriage is pointless, women aren't that great, just they're loners, they find happiness in themselves, they're not looking at ever getting married and raising families and having kids and stuff. And at one point in his age, Ambrose gets a little sick. He goes to Italy during the winters so he can be in the warmer air, the nicer air, because everyone needs to go out for air to other countries in classic books. I'm not sure what that's about. But in going to Italy, he ends up falling in love with a woman, and they get married, and he dies, like a year later. And this whole book is trying to find out, he got married to another cousin of theirs, Rachel. In this book, Philip is trying to find out, was Ambrose killed by cousin Rachel? And that's a very distinct part in this book. For most of this, he calls her my cousin Rachel, or cousin Rachel. There's not many points in this where he just calls her by Rachel, which kind of shows his feelings around her. Good writing. Very slow burn. It's just, did she or did she not kill him throughout this whole book? A lot of this revolves around money. Philip and Ambrose were very rich, and Rachel seems to be more reckless with money. Maybe that has to do with it. You don't know. It's a good slow burn gothic mystery novel. If anyone's interested in gothic reads, I highly recommend Daphne du Maurier. Again, she is slow burn, but I think she does it really, really well. This is very character driven, not very plot driven, but I feel like you can say that for all of her books, at least from what I've read so far. She's a character author, not so much a plot author, which plot driven is what I prefer, but I think she does it really well. I'm starting to understand character driven books more. I'm starting to appreciate them more, so can't wait for my next Daphne du Maurier read. And then I read The Psychopath Test by Jon Ronson, and it wasn't quite what I was expecting. It's basically this journalist who is going through talking to a bunch of experts about psychopaths. And it starts off with a mysterious book that is mailed to a bunch of people, and he's trying to find out why it was mailed. I don't remember why it was mailed. I don't remember if we ever found out why it was mailed. I don't really know what it has to do with this book. This book is 275 pages long, and I feel like it would have been a better book if it was about 150 to 200 pages. I think there's a lot of stuff you just could have cut out from this. A lot of it is, so I went to this one place and had this experience and found this expert and then talked about the thing. And I would have liked it better, I think, if it was more from a psychologist or psychiatric perspective rather than a journalist who's not really an expert on the topic. But that said, I did end up enjoying it. Another thing that I didn't love about this is there are a lot of page breaks in here. And the page breaks, I feel, were entirely for the drama of it. He ends in a dramatic sentence, there is a page break, he starts the next section. There is no point in doing that. Just put your dramatic sentence and then go on to your next paragraph. The page breaks just made the book that much longer. I don't know. But the heart of this book, and the best part of this book, he meets a psychiatrist who goes around giving conferences on psychopaths and this test that he has created to kind of weed out psychopaths. And Jon Ronson goes and finds a lot of psychopaths who are in treatment centers because, like, they don't want to keep them in jail for their whole lives, but they don't want to release them into the community. So they're in these treatment centers, and he's trying to use this test to find out for himself if they are psychopaths. And he starts doing diagnoses, which is a big problem in medical and psychological fields, is people self-diagnosing. This test also leads to a discussion on the DSM, which, if you don't know the DSM, Google it. It's a huge psychology thing. It's basically the psychology Bible, the psychiatrist Bible, on all of the mental diagnoses that are currently a thing. It changes from edition to edition, too. Homosexuality used to be in the DSM. Thankfully, it is no longer in the DSM because it's no longer considered a mental illness. But in talking about psychopaths and the DSM, there's a lot of exploration of, wow, I'm self-diagnosing. I am diagnosing these other people. I'm trying to find out for myself what their issues are. What are the problems with my doing this? What are the problems with this psychiatrist going around doing all of these conferences on his psychopath test? Like, now people are kind of diagnosing others as psychopaths. That's a really important conversation to have. I ended up enjoying this book, but I did have a lot of issues with it. Again, I thought it should be much shorter. I think it should be more to the point. and I think it would have been better done not from a journalist perspective. But that said, I am very interested in reading other books of his. He has a book on extremists, he has a book on public shaming. Like, I'm really interested in the topics that he writes about, so I'm gonna keep trying him, and we'll see what I think. And lastly, I will link my Lord of the Rings project down below. It is a project that I'm working on for my mom because I don't really read fantasy, I don't really like the Lord of the Rings stuff, but I'm trying it again anyways because the movies were a really good, like, connecting point between my mom and I growing up. We watched them together all the time, so this is a project for her. I'm going to finish this by Christmas. It's going to happen. I'm going to make it happen. Really enjoyed this. I will do a vlog next month and give you more detail. This is my cute little leather-bound edition with super, super tiny writing. So you'll hear more about this later. That is it for all of my July books. The only reason I was able to read so many was because I listened to so many audiobooks. I'm exhausted. I'm going to take it easy next month. I have like 7 books picked out for next month. I am going to Los Angeles tomorrow on vacation. I have some beach reads. I'm not actually sure what beach reads are. I don't know. So all of my videos for the next week will be pre-filmed. Check them out. I'm going on vacation. See ya.